So, what if I told you that the real secret to gaining more influence, more respect, isn't actually about being more present, but less? In this explainer, we're going to dig into the powerful, kind of counterintuitive strategy of absence and how doing less at just the right time can seriously increase your value.
You know that feeling, right? You're the one who's always there, always ready to help, and yet somehow you're the one who gets taken for granted. We're going to explore exactly why that happens and, way more importantly, how you can flip that script.
Yeah, this quote, it really gets to the heart of the matter. The more you're seen and heard from, the more common you can start to seem. We're going to see how pulling back strategically can make you more talked about, more admired, and, yeah, ultimately more powerful.
Okay, so let's dig into this idea, what we're calling the price of presence. We usually think that being constantly available is a good thing, a sign of value. But as we're about to see through some really fascinating stories from history, being too present can come with a surprisingly high cost. All right, our first story. It's a wild one. We're heading back to the world of medieval romance and courtly love. It's the story of a troubadour who made one huge mistake, and in the process showed us everything we need to know about the dangerous power of absence. So picture this, a castle somewhere in the south of France. Here we've got Sir Guillaume, a knight and a poet who has totally won the heart of the beautiful Lady Guilma. By all accounts, their romance is perfect. So it seems. But Guillaume, he gets this idea in his head from a friend that the best part of love is the bliss of making up after a big fight. So he decides he wants to experience this, and he literally fakes a quarrel. He pretends to be furious with Lady Guillemot, and then he just vanishes, gone, without a word. Well, his brilliant plan, it completely backfired. He thought his absence would make her angry, setting the stage for a big dramatic reconciliation. But instead, his sudden disappearance did the exact opposite. It fanned the flames of her love for him. She actually started pursuing him, which was pretty much unheard of for a noble lady back then. And there's this fantastic quote from La Rochefoucauld that just nails what's going on here. Guillaume had stumbled onto a powerful truth. Once a strong feeling is there, absence doesn't kill it. No, it's like wind on a fire. It gives the imagination all this room to run wild. Okay, so this isn't just about romance. This same principle is a massive tool in the world of politics, where the stakes are, well, a whole lot higher. Let's look at the story of a guy named Diocles of Media, who used absence not to win love, but to build an entire kingdom from nothing. Diocles' strategy was it was a masterclass. In this lawless land, he first makes himself indispensable, the one fair judge everybody trusts. Then, right when he's at the absolute peak of his influence, poof, he's gone, claims he's overworked. Just like he predicted, chaos returns, and the people, they come begging him to come back, offering him the one thing he wanted all along, the crown. And get this, once he became king, he doubled down on the whole absence thing. He sealed himself away in this huge palace, making himself almost invisible. By becoming scarce, he went from being a respected judge to a revered, almost godlike figure. His physical absence created this incredible aura of mystery and absolute power. So we've seen it in love, we've seen it in politics, but the big question is, why? Why does this work so darn well across the board? Let's get into the core psychology that makes strategic absence such a potent tool. It really just boils down to how our brains are wired. When someone is always around, they become, well, kind of like furniture. You know they're there, but you stop really seeing them. Their value kind of degrades. But when you pull back, you create a void. And that absence forces people to think about you, to use their imagination to fill in the gaps. You go from being taken for granted to being actively missed. And you see this pattern playing out everywhere, throughout history. In economics, think about tulipomania, when making a flower rare made a single bulb worth of fortune. In culture, author J.D. Salinger and the actress Greta Garbo both withdrew from public life, and it only made their legends grow bigger. Even Napoleon got it. He knew that if people saw him too often, he'd just become part of the background. This metaphor just says it all, doesn't it? We only really truly appreciate the sun after a long stretch of rainy days. In the same way, your presence is valued most after you've been away. It's that back and forth, that rhythm of appearance and disappearance that creates value. Okay, but hold on. there is a huge catch here, a really critical rule you have to follow. Before you even think about disappearing, you have to understand that timing is literally everything. Because if you mess this next part up, this whole strategy doesn't just fail, it blows up in your face. The idea here isn't just absence, it's strategic absence. And the very first step of that strategy is actually presence. A lot of it. You have to be what you might call omnipresent at first. I mean, think about it. You can't be missed if no one knew you were there in the first place, right? You have to establish your value first. So the order of operations here is absolutely everything. First, you have to show up. You have to become a valuable, respected part of people's lives. You have to make them love your presence. And then, only then, can you strategically pull back and let that absence do its magic. Leaving too early doesn't make you mysterious, it just makes you forgotten. This piece of ancient wisdom sums up the goal perfectly. You want to pull back just enough that people start to crave your return. You're aiming for a dynamic where your presence is always a welcome surprise, never a tiresome habit. And that really leaves us with a big question for our time, doesn't it? In this world where everyone is constantly online, always available, broadcasting their every single move, could it be that the most powerful, most influential thing you can do is to simply disappear? Definitely something to think about.
You know, we're all creatures of habit, right? We love patterns. They make us feel like we're in control. But what happens when someone decides to just break those patterns on purpose? Well, today we're diving into how being deliberately unpredictable can be one of the most powerful and, honestly, terrifying strategic tools you can possibly have.
All right, so let's set the scene. Our story kicks off right here in Reykjavik, Iceland. The year is 1972, and the stage is set for what everyone is calling the match of the century.
But this was way, way more than just a game. I mean, this was the USA versus the Soviet Union, playing out on a 64-square battlefield. The political pressure, the psychological weight, it was immense. It was basically a proxy war fought with chess pieces.
A man who is willing to commit suicide has the initiative. Wow, that's what the reigning Soviet champion Boris Spassky said while he was waiting for his American challenger. That one sentence just captures the tension perfectly, doesn't it? Spassky knew he was up against someone who was playing a totally different game, someone willing to basically self-destruct just to grab control of the situation. And that brings us to the man himself, the challenger, Bobby Fischer. From the moment he entered the picture, his behavior wasn't just a little odd. It looked, for all the world, like a complete and total mental breakdown.
So let's just walk through this timeline, because it's wild. First, he almost tanks the entire match fighting over money, and even the type of chairs they'd be sitting in. He shows up late. Then, for the very first game, he gets there just 1 minute before he'd have to forfeit, and then he makes a move that experts called the worst of his entire career. He loses, just like that. In between, he's complaining about everything. The cameras are too loud, the lights are wrong, and then for game 2, he just doesn't show up. He forfeits. He's now down 2-0, a hole nobody had ever climbed out of to win a championship.
So, to everybody watching, it looked like this guy was just cracking under the pressure. I mean, he was losing his mind in front of the whole world. But here's the question we have to ask. Was he really falling apart, or was this all part of some devastatingly clever plan?
Because here's where it gets really interesting. While the whole world was focused on Fischer, thinking he was having this public meltdown, the real breakdown, well, that was happening inside the mind of his opponent. I mean, look at what happened to Spassky, the guy who was supposed to be completely unflappable. A few games in, the champion starts to cry. He accuses Fischer of hypnotizing him, he gets paranoid, convinced his orange juice is drugged, that there are chemicals being pumped into the air. He actually has the chairs X-rayed for hidden devices. You know what they found? 2 dead flies. That's it. By the end, he was having hallucinations. His mind was so completely shattered that he just resigned.
And this right here, this is the aha moment. This is the core of the whole strategy. See, Spassky's genius was his incredible ability to read patterns, to see dozens of moves ahead because he understood how his opponents thought. So what did Fischer do? He destroyed his own patterns. The weird moves, the forfeits, the tantrums, it was all designed to create pure, unadulterated chaos, to give Spassky's brilliant analytical mind absolutely nothing to latch onto. He was willing to lose early games to win the bigger psychological war.
And yup, there's actually a name for this tactic: strategic unpredictability. It's behavior that looks like it has no consistency, no purpose at all. But really, it's all designed to do one thing: to keep your opponent so off balance and so busy trying to figure you out that they completely wear themselves out.
And believe me, this isn't just for chess. This exact playbook has been used by some of the most effective people in history, in fields that are a million miles away from a chessboard.
All right, let's take a look at our first example. We're going to the American Civil War and a general named Stonewall Jackson.
Jackson was famous for it. He'd march his small army in circles, making moves that made absolutely no tactical sense. They were so bizarre, so inexplicable, that the much larger Union army would literally just stop in its tracks for weeks at a time, totally paralyzed, trying to figure out what his grand plan was. His unpredictability let a tiny force completely neutralize a massive one. Okay, so from war to the world of art and business, let's talk about the one and only Pablo Picasso. He knew that being predictable in a negotiation was a huge weakness.
So Picasso had this little game he'd play. He'd build this really comfortable, predictable relationship with his art dealer, and then bam, for no reason at all, he'd just suddenly cut him off. The dealer would spend days in a total panic, racking his brain trying to figure out what he did wrong. And almost every time, he'd come back practically begging, offering Picasso a way higher price just to get back to that comfortable, predictable pattern he'd gotten used to.
So, what's the psychology here? Why does this work so darn well? Well, it hacks our deepest human need for patterns. When you act unpredictably, you completely shatter another person's sense of control. They can't read you, so they can't manipulate you. And that creates this low-level hum of fear and uncertainty. The initiative, it's always on your side.
But okay, hold on, there's another level to this whole game. It gets even more interesting. What if you could flip the script and use your own predictability as the ultimate unpredictable weapon?
And this is where the great Muhammad Ali comes in with his legendary rope-a-dope. For a decade, Ali had one pattern: float like a butterfly, dance around, wear his opponents out. Everyone knew it. His opponent, George Foreman, built his entire fight strategy around it. But then Ali announced he was going to do the exact opposite, come out slugging. Nobody, and I mean nobody, believed him. They thought it was suicide. But then the bell rings, and what does he do? Exactly what he said he would. He came out swinging. It completely short-circuited Foreman's mind and his strategy.
So let's break this down, this predictable feint, because it's absolutely brilliant. First, you have to establish a really strong, reliable pattern, for years even. Step 2, you publicly announce you're going to do the complete opposite. Now your opponent's own certainty becomes their prison. They've been told what's coming, but their brain literally can't accept it. It has to be a bluff. So when you finally do it, they're trapped by their own assumptions.
So you see, this power, this ability to basically become a force of nature in your interactions, it's a potent and, yeah, a dangerous tool.
You know, the best way to think about this is like a cyclone. It's a wind you can't see coming. Its shifts in direction are sudden, they're inexplicable, and because you can't predict it, there's no way to defend against it. All it leaves behind is confusion and terror.
But, and this is really important, I have to give you a warning here. This is not a strategy you use all the time. You have to use this power carefully. Too much of it, and you just look unstable or indecisive. And if you're in a junior position at work, yeah, it can backfire and get you fired fast. Sometimes the most powerful move is to just let people feel comfortable and settled around you.
And yet, this isn't some new idea. Masters of power have understood this for centuries. Just listen to the ancient philosopher Han Fei-tzu. The enlightened ruler is so mysterious, so inexplicable, that his ministers tremble below. They get it. So I want to leave you with a question, something to think about after this explainer is done. Just take a look at your own life, at work, in your personal relationships, anywhere you have to negotiate. Where are you the most predictable? And what do you think might happen if, just once in a while, you decided to break the pattern?
Let me ask you something. What if our most basic, hardwired instinct for safety, building walls, hiding away, was actually the biggest trap of all? We're about to explore a fascinating and, frankly, a completely counterintuitive idea about power and survival.
I mean, it's a fundamental question, right? We all face it, whether you're an emperor, a CEO, or just us in our daily lives. When threats seem to be popping up everywhere, what's the smartest move you can make? The gut instinct almost always is to lock the doors and pull up the drawbridge. But here's the shocker. The surprising answer is to do the exact opposite. Because that fortress you think is protecting you, yeah, that could end up being your tomb.
And this brings us to what's called the fortress fallacy. It's a simple but incredibly dangerous paradox. See, by isolating yourself to stay safe, you actually cut yourself off from the very things you need to survive. We're talking information, allies, simple awareness. You don't become safer, you just become a much easier, way more predictable target.
Now, if you want a perfect, almost unbelievable example of this, we have to look at Qin Shi Huangdi. He was the very first emperor of China. This guy was one of the most powerful men in all of history, and he took this idea of a fortress to a terrifying new extreme. Just look at how quickly his whole strategy shifted. He starts out as this mighty unifier, right? He brings all his rivals to the capital just to keep an eye on him. But pretty soon, paranoia completely takes over. He retreats into a self-made prison, a path that leads directly to his lonely and, frankly, pathetic end.
And make no mistake, this wasn't some weak or fearful ruler. People who knew him said he had the heart of a tiger or wolf. He was ruthless, ambitious, you name it. He unified China through sheer violence and cunning. But here's the thing. Even the most ferocious predator is absolutely doomed without good information.
And this is where his paranoia literally became architecture. His palace was a maze designed for one purpose and one purpose only, to make him completely invisible. He moved through these secret underground passages, and the punishment for even accidentally seeing him was immediate death. He had built the ultimate fortress, but he was its only prison.
So what was the final result of all this isolation? Well, he dies alone while on a trip, and his ministers are so in control and he is so completely out of touch that they actually hide his death for weeks. They literally use a cart of salted fish to cover up the smell of his rotting body. Think about that. The most powerful man in the world was dead, and for a while, nobody even knew.
But, you know, there's a totally different way to do things. Instead of a palace designed for a king to hide in, imagine a palace designed for a king to watch from. This brings us to the story of another ruler who faced a very similar threat, but chose the exact opposite path. Let's talk about Louis XIV of France, the famous Sun King. He also had to control a bunch of resentful nobles, but instead of hiding from them, he invited them all to come live with him in a state of radical, almost suffocating openness.
Nothing shows his method better than his morning routine, the lever. Just try to picture this. From the second he woke up, he was the center of a performance. His bedroom wasn't a private space at all, it was a public stage. And every single noble in France was desperate to get a ticket, just to watch him put on a shirt.
You see, Versailles wasn't just a home, it was a gilded cage. It was a brilliant instrument of control. By forcing the nobles to live right there under his roof, Louis could hear every rumor, he could see every single glance. They were all way too busy fighting for his favor to find any time to plot against him.
And the punishment for not playing this game? Total social annihilation. If a noble was away from court too often, Louis would just simply say, "I do not know him." And with those 5 little words, a person's entire career, their whole future, was erased. Being present was everything. So there you have it. 2 totally different strategies, the fortress of paranoia versus the open court of surveillance. And the results? Well, they couldn't be more different.
Emperor Qin's fortress cut him off from all information, which allowed his ministers to plot in secret. Louis XIV, on the other hand, was flooded with information. He turned his dangerous nobles into petty, squabbling courtiers. The final outcome? Qin died alone and poisoned, while Louis reigned in relative peace for over 50 years.
And look, this isn't just a history lesson about a couple of long-dead rulers. The fortress fallacy is a timeless truth. It applies everywhere, from corporate strategy all the way down to our own personal lives.
You know, the master strategist Machiavelli argued against physical fortresses for this exact reason. He knew a fortress just makes you a predictable target. Everybody knows where you are. It easily becomes your prison, cutting you off from help and seriously limiting your options.
And maybe the most powerful illustration of this doesn't even come from history, but from literature. Edgar Allan Poe's chilling story, The Mask of the Red Death, is a perfect parable for just how futile isolation really is. Okay, so in this story, a terrible plague called the Red Death is just ravaging the land. So Prince Prospero does what seems like the logical thing. He builds the ultimate fortress. He gathers 1,000 of his friends, retreats to this fortified abbey, and literally welds the iron gates shut. His belief was simple. Inside, we are safe. Outside, there is only death. But then, right in the middle of a huge masquerade ball, a mysterious guest appears. This figure is tall and gaunt, shrouded like a corpse,
and its mask looks like the face of a plague victim. It just moves silently through the party, and nobody dares to stop it.
And then, this terrifying realization dawns on everyone. The very thing they tried so desperately to lock out was already inside. The Red Death wasn't kept out by the welded gates, it was sealed in with them. Their fortress wasn't a sanctuary, it was a tomb. And one by one, they all died.
This lesson, it's not just about emperors or princes. We all build fortresses, don't we? In our careers, our relationships, our beliefs. We isolate ourselves from uncomfortable feedback or new ideas thinking it keeps us safe. So the real question I want to leave you with is this. What fortresses are you building? And what are you really sealing yourself off from?
All right, today we're diving into a skill that is, let's be honest, absolutely critical. It's the art of judging character. You know, in this complex world of ours, figuring out who you're actually dealing with isn't just a nice little advantage. It's everything.
And this ancient classic, man, it just sets the stage perfectly. It's basically telling us that not everyone operates on the same frequency. The real key to navigating life is knowing your audience and tailoring your approach. I mean, think about it. Reciting poetry to a swordsman isn't just going to fall flat. It could get you killed.
And that really brings us right to the heart of this entire explainer. Look, if you only take away one single thing today, let it be this. Misjudging people and offending the wrong person is one of the single most dangerous, most costly mistakes you can ever make in any part of your life.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll talk about why this mistake is so devastating. Then, we'll get into a field guide of 5 dangerous types of people to avoid. We're going to zoom in on 3 of them: the serpent, the insecure man, and the surprisingly tricky, unassuming man. And then we'll wrap it all up with the hunter's final rule for judging character.
So why is this so critical? Well, it's because you can never, ever assume that everyone is going to react to your strategies or even just an offhand comment in the same way. Some people, if you slight them, will literally spend the rest of their lives plotting revenge. They are, as the source material so perfectly puts it, wolves in lamb's clothing.
So to make it, to succeed, you have to get good at telling the wolves from the lambs. It's all about recognizing the different species in the social jungle and acting accordingly. And today, we're zeroing in on the 5 most dangerous and difficult types you're probably going to run into out there.
Okay, so here's our lineup. The arrogant man, the insecure man, Mr. Suspicion, the serpent, and the unassuming man. Now, they're all tricky in their own way, but we're going to focus on 3 that are really eye-opening. You've got the serpent who plans this cold-blooded, patient revenge. Then there's the insecure man who will just nibble you to death with small attacks. And finally, the unassuming man who won't actually hurt you, but boy, will he waste your time and energy.
So let's jump right into our first case study, the serpent. This type is one of the most dangerous, and you know why? Because the threat comes from you underestimating them, especially when they look weak or totally unimportant. Now pay close attention to this key detail. No anger. This isn't some hot-headed impulsive reaction. No, this is cold. It's calculating, and it is incredibly patient. The serpent takes that insult, files it away, and just waits and waits for the perfect moment to strike, which could be months or even years down the road.
And this story just illustrates the danger perfectly. Back in the 5th century BC, there's this exiled prince, Chung-er, and he's basically living in rags. He passes through a state where the ruler just treats him with total contempt. And get this, the ruler's own minister warns him, saying, look, either treat this guy with respect or kill him now. The ruler just laughed it off. Big mistake. Years later, Chung-er comes back to power. He remembers that insult, raises a massive army, and completely annihilates that kingdom.
So the takeaway here is pretty stark, right? You gain absolutely nothing from an unnecessary insult. You just never know who you're really dealing with. That little bit of satisfaction you get from a witty, cutting remark, it's gone in a second. But the memory of that insult, oh, that can fuel a devastating revenge for years to come.
Okay, now let's look at a totally different kind of danger. This one isn't driven by cold, patient calculation. Nope. This is driven by a desperately fragile ego. This is the hopelessly insecure man, and his revenge is all about trying to patch up his damaged sense of self-worth.
See, unlike the serpent's one big, decisive strike, this type is all about a slow, corrosive attack. They feel so deeply, personally wounded by being deceived, and they will go to just extraordinary lengths to soothe that wound.
And that often means a relentless campaign of tiny attacks that nibble you to death over a very long time.
The story of J. Frank Norfleet is just wow. It's a staggering example. In 1920, this Texas cattleman gets conned out of his entire life savings. Now, most people would be too embarrassed to even admit it. Not Norfleet. He told the police, "I'll get them if it takes the rest of my life." And he meant it. For 5 years, he hunted these guys across North America, bankrupting himself until he, by himself, brought down the entire con ring.
So, was it rational? Not even close. Absolutely not. This obsession cost him his fortune, his family, everything. But see, for the insecure man, overcoming the humiliation of being made a fool of is worth any price. They're driven by an insecurity so profound that the response will be completely, wildly out of proportion to whatever you did in the first place.
Okay, so we've seen the danger of revenge, both the cold kind and the obsessive kind. But what about a different kind of risk? Sometimes, the problem isn't that someone will come after you, it's just futility, wasted effort. And that brings us to our final archetype, the plain and unassuming man.
This type is so interesting because they're almost immune to complex schemes. See, for a deception to work, the target usually needs a little bit of imagination, right? They need to see the potential upside. But this person? They're so literal, so blunt, that the bait just doesn't even register. They won't get revenge on you, but they will absolutely exhaust you.
This story about the art dealers who went after Henry Ford is it's perfect. In 1920, a bunch of top dealers team up to land Ford, the richest man in America. They make this incredible, magnificent catalog of the 100 greatest paintings in the world. Ford looks through it. He's delighted, but he's also kind of confused. And when they finally explain that they want to sell him the originals, he just goes, "But gentlemen, what would I want with the original pictures when the ones right here in these books are so beautiful?" Their whole elaborate plan just poof. It collapsed against his simple, literal mind.
So after seeing all these archetypes in action, what's the takeaway? How do we get better at this? How do we avoid these traps? Well, the source material calls this the hunter's final rule. You have to know your prey before you even think about setting the trap.
Here are the crucial points. First, just accept it. This is probably the most important skill you can ever develop. Second, and this is a big one, never rely on your instincts. Your gut feeling is just not reliable. Instead, you have to gather concrete knowledge. Watch people. Listen. Third, never trust appearances. A smile can hide a serpent's heart. You have to look for the contradictions between what people say and what they actually do.
And this quote from Lord Chesterfield just hammers the point home, doesn't it? You might actually get away with a direct wrong, an honest mistake. But contempt? Making someone feel small or foolish or insignificant, that's an insult our pride holds on to forever. That's the fuel that powers both the serpent and the insecure man.
And that's really the bottom line. This lesson is absolute. There is zero benefit, none, to being ignorant about the people you're dealing with. There's just no situation where it pays to be blind. You either learn to tell the lions from the lambs, or, sooner or later, you are going to pay the price.
And so, I'll leave you with this final question to think about. As you go about your own life, dealing with colleagues, rivals, even friends, who is it that you might be misjudging? Who, in your world, have you underestimated?
Let's talk about something that feels a little backwards. What if the real secret to gaining power wasn't about choosing the right side, but about choosing no side at all? Today, we're diving into the art of strategic independence, a fascinating idea that can turn you from just another piece on the board into the one controlling the whole game. This quote just cuts right to the heart of it, doesn't it? The whole idea is that by refusing to commit, you actually force others to compete for your attention. You suddenly become the one who is pursued, not the one doing the pursuing. It's a complete flip of the power dynamic, so let's unpack how it really works. Now, let's be super clear here. This isn't about being flaky or, just being afraid to make a choice. Not at all. This is a calculated strategy. It's all about protecting your own autonomy and keeping your options wide open, which, as we're about to see, is one of the ultimate sources of power. So how does this actually work in practice? Well, it really plays out in two main ways. First, we're going to see how staying uncommitted can make you intensely desirable. Then we'll explore how it lets you rise above all the drama, letting other people wear themselves out while you get to reap the rewards. All right, so how do you become the prize to be won? The principle is actually pretty simple. The less you commit, the harder people will work to win you over.
And, maybe no one in history understood this better than Queen Elizabeth I. I mean, just imagine the pressure. You're a new queen, and the entire kingdom is screaming for you to get married and produce an heir. The question wasn't if she should marry, but who, and the pressure was on to do it fast. But this wasn't some short-term plan for her. This was a 40-year masterclass in strategic independence. For decades, she just skillfully juggled suitors from all over England and Europe. From English nobles in the 1560s to French dukes in the 70s. She used the promise of marriage as her ultimate diplomatic weapon. It secured peace and kept her rivals totally off balance, all without her ever giving up a shred of her power. This quote really says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly captures her mindset. For Elizabeth, marriage wasn't a partnership. Nope. It was a surrender of power to a husband, and by extension, to his nation. She knew deep down that her independence was way more valuable than any alliance she could get by giving it up. And Elizabeth had a perfect cautionary tale playing out right next door. Her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, Mary chose commitment. She married Lord Darnley, and in doing so, she plunged her kingdom into total chaos and eventually lost her throne. I mean, the contrast couldn't be more stark. Elizabeth saw firsthand that for a queen, commitment was a trap. So the takeaway here is really powerful. Elizabeth transformed what everyone saw as a major weakness, her being unmarried, into her greatest strength. By refusing to give a final answer, she kept everyone fighting for her favor and stayed the one and only master of her own destiny. But okay, this strategy isn't just about attracting suitors. It's also about navigating conflict. The second part of this whole idea is about staying above the fray, refusing to get dragged into other people's fights and letting them weaken each other while you hold on to your strength. For our next example, let's turn to Isabella d'Este. She ruled the tiny little state of Mantua, which was in a truly impossible spot. Think of her as a small fish surrounded by sharks. France, Venice, the Papal States, all circling, ready to take a bite out of northern Italy. On paper, Mantua was absolutely doomed. But Isabella, she was a master strategist. Here's her playbook. First, she charmed everyone, sending gifts and flattering letters to all the big players. Then, she made it seem like she was on everyone's side, all while secretly committing to only one thing, the survival of her home, Mantua. She just let them fight it out. Her dedication to staying neutral was just incredible. At one point, while her own husband was fighting for the Pope against the French, Isabella secretly let French troops pass right through Mantua and fed them intelligence. She even had the French stage a fake looting of her own city just to keep up the appearance of neutrality. It was an absolute masterstroke. There's this ancient saying that just nails Isabella's strategy. While the great powers, the snipe and the muscle, were fighting each other to exhaustion, she was the fisherman, just patiently waiting to collect the rewards. And because of this, Mantua didn't just survive, it thrived. It became a hub of wealth and culture while its powerful neighbors basically destroyed each other. So we've seen how strategic independence can be an unbelievably powerful tool. But, and this is a big but, it's also a dangerous game. So let's look at how you might apply this law and the critical catch you have to be aware of. So the benefits are pretty clear, right? By staying independent, you seem powerful, you're hard to pin down. You don't get dragged into draining fights. And because everyone wants your support, you're the one holding all the cards. You're always in a position to make a move, not just react to what others are doing. But, of course, this brings up a huge question. It's a really delicate balancing act. Playing all sides can work wonders, but if you push it just a little too far, the entire strategy can completely collapse on you. And here's the real danger. There is a razor-thin line between being seen as this desirable, independent prize and being seen as a manipulative player. One wrong move, and you go from powerful to just untrustworthy. And when that happens, the whole thing can backfire spectacularly. Because if people finally realize they're being played, the game is over. The groups you've been keeping at arm's length might just give up on you. Or even worse, they might realize they have one thing in common, how frustrated they are with you. And suddenly, all those potential allies can team up and become your sworn enemies. Which leaves us with a really fascinating question for our world today, right? A world that is constantly demanding that we pick a side. Is strategic independence the ultimate form of power, or is it the ultimate risk? In trying to be the master of everyone, do you just end up becoming the enemy of all? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us.